San Jacinto ended a campaign, but it did not end the crisis. In April 1836, Sam Houston's army had defeated Santa Anna and captured the Mexican president. Texas had won independence in practice. But practice and recognition are not the same thing. A new republic could raise a flag, elect leaders, send diplomats, and claim borders. Yet if the country it broke away from refused to accept the loss, the war could simply change shape. That is what happened after the Texas Revolution. The Republic of Texas entered the world with glory, debt, danger, and uncertainty. It claimed a vast territory, far larger than the settlements it could actually control. It had a heroic battlefield story, but it also had a weak treasury, frontier violence, political divisions, and a population still trying to recover from war. Mexico refused to recognize Texas independence. Mexican leaders argued that Santa Anna's agreements meant nothing because they had been signed while he was a prisoner. From Mexico City's point of view, Texas was still Mexican territory in rebellion. From Texas's point of view, San Jacinto had settled the question. Between those positions lay almost 10 years of tension. Texas wanted security. Many of its leaders wanted annexation by the United States almost immediately. Annexation promised protection, credit, trade, and a future inside a powerful republic. But for Washington, Texas was not a simple prize. It was a diplomatic fuse. If the United States annexed Texas, Mexico might see it as an act of aggression. And inside the United States, Texas raised another explosive question: slavery. The Republic of Texas protected slavery. Adding Texas to the Union would strengthen slaveholding power and inflame the sectional balance between North and South. So Texas waited. It built a republic, while many of its citizens hoped the republic would not remain independent forever. Presidents in Washington hesitated. Mexico warned. Britain and France watched, sometimes imagining that an independent Texas might become a useful buffer against American expansion. Sam Houston understood the diplomatic game. At times he courted foreign recognition and hinted at closer ties with Britain. Whether he wanted a truly independent Texas or used that possibility to pressure Washington, the effect was clear. Texas could not be ignored. It sat between Mexico and the United States like a question no one could answer without risk. Mexico, in the years after San Jacinto, was not a silent, defeated power. It was a wounded nation facing internal instability, financial strain, regional conflict, and the humiliating loss of a northern province it still claimed. Mexican leaders saw Texas not as a legitimate new country, but as stolen territory encouraged by Anglo-American settlers and protected by U.S. ambition. That view mattered. It meant diplomacy could not begin from shared assumptions. Texas and the United States spoke of independence and annexation. Mexico spoke of rebellion and sovereignty. The border question made everything worse. Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its southern and western boundary. That claim reached far beyond the settled core of the young republic. Mexico treated the Nueces River as the practical boundary of Texas. The wide land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande was sparsely settled, contested, and dangerous. It was not just a line on a map. It was ranch country, brush country, patrol country, a place where claims mattered because armies might eventually march to enforce them. Mexico launched raids and expeditions into Texas during the Republic years, including the occupation of San Antonio in 1842. The message was clear. Mexico had not accepted the new reality. Texans answered with outrage and their own expeditions, some disastrous. The borderlands remained unstable. For Tejano families, the period could be especially bitter. Some had supported resistance to Santa Anna and helped create the Republic. Yet after independence, many faced suspicion, dispossession, and pressure from Anglo settlers who increasingly dominated political life. The revolution had promised liberty against centralism, but the new republic did not produce equal safety for all who had fought for it. Indigenous nations also faced accelerating pressure. The Republic of Texas sought land, settlement, and security. Comanche power, raiding, diplomacy, and retaliation shaped life on the frontier. The Republic's weakness did not make it harmless. It made its leaders desperate for land and legitimacy. Every year, Texas remained unresolved. The crisis deepened. Mexico could not easily reconquer it. Texas could not feel secure alone. The United States could not stop looking west. The question became not whether Texas mattered, but who would finally act. By the early 1840s, annexation had become one of the most dangerous issues in American politics. President John Tyler, isolated from much of his own party, saw Texas as a way to shape history and rescue his political legacy. He pushed for annexation. Supporters argued that Texas belonged naturally with the United States, that Americans had settled it, that expansion was destiny, and that foreign powers might otherwise gain influence over it. Opponents saw danger everywhere. Annexation could mean war with Mexico. It could add slave territory. It could fracture the Union. It could prove that the United States was becoming an empire while still speaking the language of Republican liberty. In 1844, the politics of Texas helped transform a presidential election. James K. Polk, a Tennessee Democrat and protege of Andrew Jackson, emerged as a dark horse candidate. Polk embraced expansion. He wanted Texas. He wanted Oregon. He wanted access to the Pacific. His supporters framed expansion as national destiny, a mission to carry the United States across the continent. The phrase "manifest destiny" captured the mood of many Americans, though not all. To believers, expansion seemed inevitable, providential, and democratic. To critics, it looked like conquest wrapped in moral language. To Mexico, it looked like a direct threat. The election of 1844 signaled that the United States was moving toward action. Tyler moved quickly before leaving office. Instead of relying on a treaty which had failed in the Senate, annexation advanced through a joint resolution of Congress. Texas accepted. In 1845, the United States annexed the Republic of Texas. Mexico broke diplomatic relations. That moment is crucial. War had not yet begun, but the relationship had snapped. The United States had absorbed a republic Mexico still claimed as rebellious territory. Texas entered the Union with the boundary claim to the Rio Grande. Mexico rejected both the annexation and the boundary claim. Annexation did not solve the Texas problem. It internationalized it. James K. Polk entered the presidency in March 1845 with a clear sense of purpose. He was not a passive expansionist. He had goals, and he moved toward them with discipline. Texas was only one part of his larger map. Polk wanted Oregon settled with Britain. He wanted California and New Mexico. He believed the United States should stretch to the Pacific. The annexation of Texas gave him one crisis. His ambitions toward the West gave him another. California was especially tempting. Its ports looked toward Asia and the Pacific world. Its distance from Mexico City made it seem vulnerable. American settlers and merchants were already present. Polk hoped to acquire California and New Mexico, by negotiation if possible. To that end, he sent John Slidell to Mexico in late 1845. Slidell's mission was delicate and ambitious. He was to discuss the Texas boundary, seek settlement of U.S. claims, and explore the purchase of New Mexico and California. But Mexico's government was unstable, and accepting Slidell would have looked like accepting humiliation. Mexican leaders faced public anger over Texas. To negotiate the sale of more territory after losing Texas could be political suicide. Slidell was not received. Polk interpreted that refusal as an insult and a failure of diplomacy. But Mexico saw the matter differently. From Mexico's view, the United States had annexed disputed territory and now wanted to negotiate from a position of pressure. Diplomacy conducted in the shadow of expansion did not feel neutral. While Slidell waited and failed, the military situation sharpened. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor and U.S. troops into Texas. At first, Taylor camped near Corpus Christi, close to the Nueces River. This position was provocative, but not yet the final step. The real escalation came when Polk ordered Taylor south toward the Rio Grande. If the Rio Grande was the rightful border, Taylor was moving within American territory. If the Nueces was the true boundary of Texas, Taylor was marching into disputed or Mexican territory. That difference would define the argument over the war. The land between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande was not empty in the way politicians often imagined. It contained ranches, roads, settlements, families, and loyalties shaped by generations of borderland life. But it was thinly governed, exposed, and claimed by more than one power. When Zachary Taylor's army moved south in 1846, it carried the United States claim with it. Soldiers marched through harsh country, past scrub, prairie, heat, insects, and uncertain water. Their orders turned a boundary argument into a physical presence. Across the Rio Grande stood Matamoros, a Mexican town watching the American advance with alarm. Taylor established a position opposite Matamoros and began construction of a fortification that would be known as Fort Texas. Mexican forces under General Mariano Arista and other commanders faced a direct challenge. U.S. troops were now on land. Mexico did not accept as American. Both sides could claim they were defending sovereignty. That is what made the crisis so combustible. Polk needed Mexico to negotiate or give him a cause. Mexico needed to resist without appearing weak. Taylor needed to follow orders. Mexican commanders needed to answer a foreign army on contested ground. Every rider, patrol, and report became dangerous. In April 1846, Mexican forces crossed the Rio Grande. A detachment of U.S. dragoons under Captain Seth Thornton was ambushed north of the river. Several Americans were killed, wounded, or captured. The clash became known as the Thornton Affair. For Polk, the news was exactly the kind of event that could move Congress. He declared that American blood had been shed on American soil. Critics would challenge that claim immediately. Abraham Lincoln, then a young congressman, would later demand to know the exact spot where blood had been shed. Was it truly American soil, or disputed soil made American by presidential assertion and military movement? But in May 1846, the political machinery moved quickly. Congress declared war. Many Americans rallied behind the flag. Others warned that the nation had been maneuvered into a war of conquest. The Mexican-American War had begun. From the start, the war carried two competing narratives. Polk's story was simple and powerful. Mexico had invaded American territory and attacked American soldiers. The United States was defending its rights, its border, and its honor. In a country already alive with expansionist confidence, that story could move crowds and votes. The opposing story was darker. The United States had annexed disputed Texas, sent an army into contested land, tried to buy more Mexican territory, and then used the first clash as a justification for war. To critics, the conflict looked less like defense and more like expansion by design. Both stories mattered because the war would not only be fought on battlefields. It would be fought in newspapers, sermons, campaign speeches, congressional debates, and private letters. Volunteers would march with confidence. Families would read casualty lists. Politicians would calculate. Abolitionists would ask whether the war was meant to expand slavery. Expansionists would dream of Pacific ports. Mexico faced its own internal crisis. Political instability, regional divisions, weak finances, and military challenges made resistance difficult. Yet the war also became a defense of national honor. Mexico had lost Texas. It would not quietly surrender more land. Zachary Taylor, still in northern Mexico, would soon fight the first major battles at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. Those battles would decide whether his army could hold its position near the Rio Grande. But the deeper decision had already been made. Diplomacy had failed. Annexation had hardened into confrontation. A disputed boundary had become a battlefield. The war was no longer coming. It had arrived. Episode 3 ends at the threshold of open war, because the story now changes speed. The first two episodes followed Texas from settlement to revolution. This episode followed the unresolved aftermath into annexation and crisis. The next episode moves into combat between national armies. Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma, the siege of Fort Texas, and the rise of Zachary Taylor as a national figure. But before the cannons open across the prairie, it is worth holding the full chain in view. Mexico invited settlement into Texas to strengthen a frontier. The settlers became politically powerful, culturally distinct, and increasingly tied to the United States. Santa Anna's centralism helped push Texas into revolt. San Jacinto created a republic Mexico refused to recognize. Annexation pulled that unresolved republic into the United States. Polk's expansionist map pointed beyond Texas toward California and New Mexico. The Nueces and Rio Grande became rival claims. Taylor's march made the claim physical. Thornton's clash made it political. No single event explains the war. The war emerged from a chain of decisions, Ambitions, fears, and opportunities. For Texans, annexation promised safety. For Polk, it was part of a continental vision. For Mexico, it was the theft of a province and the threat of more losses to come. For enslaved people and anti-slavery critics, expansion raised the question of whether new lands would carry bondage westward. For Tejanos and borderland families, the crisis meant armies arriving where older communities already lived. The map was about to change. The price would be paid by soldiers, civilians, and nations that could no longer step back from the line they had drawn.